Welcome to SpaceDoc. I'm your SpaceDoc, Dr. James, here to share my passion for space and the Star Trek universe. In this episode, we're going to be looking at the third issue from the Fanhome official Star Trek Starships collection, the USS Farragut NCC 1647 from Star Trek Strange New Worlds. I just received this package yesterday after a little bit of a shipping delay. As many online have noted, the shipments from Fanhome have been less than perfect. I haven't had any major issues yet, but I will note that basically every shipment that I've gotten from them has taken maybe 10 days just to leave the warehouse after they create a shipping label. Once it actually gets into the hands of USPS, it's usually pretty quick to get to where I'm located in the United States. It is a little annoying that the service by which they get these packages to the United States doesn't seem to be that time effective. Hopefully this is something they can adjust in the future, but for now, why don't we actually take the ship out, have a look at her, and see what she's got. So the ship comes in the same sort of standard purpley box from Fanhome, with some nice printed views on multiple sides of the USS Farragut, which is nice. Probably will make it easier for folks who collect and can keep the boxes to be able to store the boxes and know which box goes where, regardless of how you are stacking these things. The box itself is sealed up with a little plastic sticker here, so why don't we open her up? So as per usual, the first thing you see inside is the magazine. A nice beautiful print. I'm going to set this aside. We'll come back to it in a little bit. And there's the Farragut. I'm going to take out the stand and the base. We'll look at those in a little bit. And let's get right to the ship. First, I am glad that my ship arrived with all the nacelles attached. I've been paying attention to social media, and a lot of Farraguts have been arriving to people with their nacelles and pylons attached. So mine is, all the nacelles are attached. They do feel a little loose, but let's get to that in a little bit. At first glance, it's an interesting looking ship. I was looking forward to getting the USS Farragut. One of the things that I like from the Star Trek Starships collection, both when Eaglemoss was doing it and now when Fanhome is doing it, is it lets you get models of some of the more out there ships that maybe only show up in the background or in a few scenes. And by getting these ships in hand, it lets you really have a look at them and get to appreciate some of the design that goes into the show that otherwise might be hard to see. It's really nice, and I find that it helps me, I don't know, appreciate the ships a bit more and grow to love ships that maybe otherwise are not hero ships. Well, now that we have the Farragut in hand, why don't we have a look across the entire ship? We'll start at the top and work our way down and aft and have a look at all the little details on this. So the ship, by and large, looks a lot like the version of the USS Enterprise from Star Trek Discovery Season 2. Almost identical saucer. Of course, things differ when we get aft and below the saucer, but the top looks very familiar. The bridge dome is nice. So you can see a nice sensor pod painted in with a light blue with some texture there, which is nice. The bridge beneath it, or the bridge dome, I should say, looks good. There are some windows molded in on the side. I actually cannot tell if those windows have any painted detail in there. If it is, it's very subtle. But I don't mind the lack of paint. The mold looks pretty good, and the shadows cast by the molding help create the illusion of the windows regardless of whether there's paint in there. And of course, if there's no paint, then it's not possible to misalign your paint in your windows. The front of the bridge has a lot of panel marking, which looks like it would be the location of the view screen or a forward access hatch. I will note that there is no actual painted detail there, so I'm going to guess that this ship does not actually have a windowed bridge view screen, or at least it's not captured in this model. That region, while it has a outline to it, has the same sort of Aztecing pattern that the rest of the primary hull has. So I'd have to look back, rewatch some episodes of Strange New Worlds to see how accurate that is, but I think it's fine. A little protrusion on the top, which often is associated with turbo lifts on the inside. The hull itself has sort of a multi-gray tone to it. It has a nice Aztec pattern, so there's a sort of flat gray background within a mottled gray secondary coat for the Aztecing, which I think is nice. I always like when they use Aztecing on Star Trek ships. As I said before in previous episodes, it's a nice way of communicating scale, that this is a large ship. These are individual panels of metal. Really helps, again, set the scale. The registry on the front is nice. It's a very dark gray. It's not quite black, almost like a graphite kind of gray, especially the way the light reflects off of it. There is a little bit of molded detail behind the registry back there. It's a little bit of white paint on it, or at least a light gray paint. On the Strange New Worlds and Discovery ships, they have sort of recessed lighting that illuminates the registry, which is really nice. There are a few phaser turrets here just in dark gray, but they are molded, so you can see a couple little spherical domes on top of the phaser pairs, 3 of them around the top of the saucer. It's also interesting to note that there are some very teeny tiny little protuberances. Not sure what they are in terms of the ship design, but it's nice to have a little bit of extra detail on the saucer. It makes it a little bit less than sort of the flat disc that it otherwise is. The panel lining is nice. There's some more, in this case, painted gray protuberances down here. Some recessed gray markings around the rim. And then we get to the edge of the saucer. There are very teeny tiny navigation lights, red on port, green on starboard. And yeah, otherwise looks good. On the back, we move towards sort of the impulse deck. The Farragut, like the Strange New Worlds and Discovery Enterprise, has these sort of Enterprise B Excelsior fins on the back, which I like. I like, actually, how the Strange New Worlds Enterprise brought in a few elements from the Excelsior. This wider impulse deck, that's connected to this bridge in this wide region. And even some of the locations of the panel lines are reminiscent of the Excelsior or the Enterprise B. It's a nice callback. So let's now move to the rim of the saucer. So a notable difference from this and the Strange New Worlds version of the Enterprise is, unlike the Strange New Worlds version of the Enterprise, there are no ring of windows around the top rim of the saucer. This looks much more like how the Discovery version of the Enterprise was, which lacked those windows, which is more referential to the original version of the Enterprise, which did not have that many windows around the edge. There are some, and I do believe that these are both molded and painted. There's a little bit of light blue that you can see a little bit offset to the right of the windows here. So yet again, a little bit of mold window mold paint misalignment, but it's very close here. And the blue is actually very subtle. So I think actually my camera is doing a better job at picking it up than my eye is when I look at the model. So it doesn't bug me that much. I'm not as big of a stickler for that as I think a lot of other people are. Some interesting molded windows or docking ports here on the port side of the ship, matched onto the starboard side. The windows continue around the edge. It's nice that the Aztecing continues onto the edge of the saucer. I tend to find that in the Eagle Moss models that the edges of saucers tend to get less detail, either molded detail or painted detail, presumably tied back to how these models are constructed, the molds of the models, how they're painted. But this looks pretty good. Moving back to the back of the ship, to the back of the saucer and the impulse engines. Again, this looks very much like the Strange New Worlds impulse engines. There's actually, let's see if I can get how close I can get to the impulse engines in the camera. There's some nice molded detail in there. You can see sort of a texture of bumps and dots in there. That's a nice detail that is not in many other models. There's a dark gray sort of, I don't know, maybe it's cargo bays or shuttle bays or docking ports. Just lots of nice greebly details down there on the back of the saucer, which is nice. Let's get to the bottom of the saucer itself. Again, basically looks like the bottom of the Strange New Worlds version of the Enterprise. These nice triangular sort of, I believe they are landing legs or something of the like, at least in many technical manuals. Nice registry printing on the bottom. Doesn't say Farragut on the bottom, but does have the registry both facing forward and aft, depending on which side of the ship you're on. There are windows close to the bottom of the primary hull, molded in and also with a little bit of light blue paint. Also note at the edge there are, yet again, also navigation lights here. These are very tiny lights in red. It looks to be a front one in white and then green. Of course, one of the most interesting things of this design is this sort of blended engineering hull and the deflector dish. So you have a very elliptical deflector dish, somewhat reminiscent of the NX-01 almost. Here it's plastic with a nice sort of coppery sheen to it. The mold looks pretty good for that deflector dish. It is attached by a pretty thin piece of plastic, so I'm going to guess that this is going to be pretty fragile. I do like that it's emanating from this sort of circular construct with a lot of rings. Again, pretty familiar to both the original Enterprise and the Strange New Worlds version of the Enterprise. I will note that the deflector dish on mine is not perfectly aligned, pointed forward. You can actually see it here. The deflector, you could imagine, should be aligned with the center grid line, but it's shifted a little bit to the right from this vantage point. So it's not perfect, but given the fragility of that deflector dish, I don't think I dare try to mess with it. Yeah, I can kind of wiggle it, but I'm pretty sure if I wiggle it too much, I'm just going to snap it right off. And I don't think that's worth doing and trying to re-glue. The secondary hull looks nice. A lot of molded texture on there. Actually, I don't see many windows. I don't think I see any windows on the secondary hull, which maybe is true to the original ship. Kind of something I wish that they could have. In general, I like when ships have lots of windows. This is something I've said before on past reviews of other ships. It helps make it feel like a real spaceship, one that you would be using to explore the cosmos and look at things. It also sets a good sense of scale. But the secondary hull looks good. You can see the bottom of the impulse deck as well back here with a lot of molded texture and very similar to the Strange New Worlds Enterprise. Now as we move towards the engines, another fascinating style choice on this ship was the choice to have these very long pylons that are curving downward and swept back. It makes this profile very unique, even though it has some similarities to things like the Reliant and even, I guess, the California class USS Cerritos. This profile is very unique. I can't think of an example where you really see this sort of profile on a starship in Star Trek. I guess maybe you could imagine that this is not a terribly different profile from the Oberth class USS Grissom, which has this sort of swept pylon connecting to a central secondary hull. The pylons themselves look nice. Again, some nice gray Aztecing. I will say that they do feel a little wobbly, like this is plastic. It's pretty thin plastic in a very odd shape, so it doesn't feel very strong. Like I can wobble these nacelles pretty aggressively, so maybe that contributed to a lot of folks' Farragut's nacelles popping off in transit. I do like that choice. It's just, at least it's a bold choice, and I like when Star Trek ships are different. I don't need to see the exact same thing. I don't even need to see the Reliant copied and pasted with just TOS or Strange New Worlds era nacelles. This is different. The nacelles themselves look vaguely like the Strange New Worlds Enterprise nacelles, but they are noticeably different. So they both have transparent red front Bussard collectors surrounded by molded plastic. A lot of nice molded detail, some gray paint for these bits on the side. And then the nacelle length changes pretty abruptly in a couple places, both here at the front of the nacelle and then here very starkly at the back of the nacelle, where the nacelle gets a lot thinner. And that's a notable difference from the Strange New Worlds Enterprise. On the interior of the nacelles, there's a painted light blue grille. It's not molded plastic, it's just a painted light blue. I think that color is really nice, so I don't mind that it's painted instead of molded. If it was molded, it'd almost certainly be darker, and I like that it's got the nice light color. On the exterior part of the nacelles, you have some red pinstriping and the registry again. I do love the red pinstriping borrowed from the original Enterprise. As we move to the very back, we then have some fins on the back of the nacelles, both fins on top, like the original Enterprise, and then a fin on the bottom, like the Strange New Worlds Enterprise. The very back of the nacelle actually has an interesting amount of detail. Like the cage version of the Enterprise. Where is it? I should double check my original Enterprises and their pilots, because this section changed between the different pilots. Maybe this is where no man has gone before end cap. But like the Strange New Worlds Enterprise, it has this sort of grille pattern. Here they've actually painted it. The little grill holes are painted light blue, and the tops and the bottoms have a light blue, which is a nice level of detail that I didn't necessarily expect on the back of the nacelle. The nacelles themselves are not perfectly aligned. It's going to be hard to show that on camera You can kind of see that the left nacelle droops a little bit further down into the left compared to the right nacelle. They're largely parallel, so that's nice. But I do note, you can notice, for example, that this one hangs a little bit lower. It's probably actually this one, because you can see at the front of the Bussard collectors, you have these sort of four, ridges at the 12, 3, 6, and 9 clock positions. And on this nacelle on the port, they are not necessarily perfectly aligned up-down, whereas they're much closer to aligned up-down on the starboard nacelle. So I kind of suspect that this pylon is not perfectly in the right position. So, and you can, actually, if you look at it from the bottom and I get the camera view right, you can maybe see that this nacelle is slightly further from the center line than this nacelle. That's kind of hard to show on camera. So I'm mentally deciding if this bugs me enough to risk popping the nacelles off and repositioning them myself. I have definitely done that for past Eagle Moss models where I found the nacelle alignment annoying. And I just am not yet certain if I find this annoying enough to risk it. Because it's always possible to try to snap off a nacelle, and instead of it breaking where the glue is, which would be down in here, could actually break the entire nacelle, which would be much more of a pain to fix. So I'll think about that. So yeah, this is an odd little ship. I as I said before, I like when Star Trek takes chances and makes things that feel like they belong. This does feel like a Star Trek starship. It feels like it should be a contemporary of the Discovery and the Strange New Worlds era Enterprise. I think it looks pretty nice. It is a background ship, so it just doesn't have a whole ton of detail. They never had to flesh it out all that much. Maybe it'd be nice if they had a view screen window up front to make it consistent with the Enterprise and just kind of make this less bland up on top, but this looks like it does in the show. I like the paint and molded detail, and actually the molded detail is really nice given how simple this model is. The molding lines are nice, the windows are nice. These little extra protrusions add a little bit of flavor. The painting looks good. I specifically appreciate the molded detail in the impulse engines, and then on the back of the warp nacelles. That gridded texture is really nice. I think the only things that are weaknesses, I guess, are the alignment of the nacelles and that deflector dish. And they're not all that bad. If this was up on display on a bookshelf, you may not even notice. But part of the joy of having these ships is you get to swoosh them. And then you do notice when they're not aligned. The ship is an interesting one. Look at it, and I can't tell if it feels like it's balanced or not, but it's a cool ship nonetheless, and I'm glad that they added it to the collection. I'm glad that this was the first one added from Strange New Worlds to the collection. There's a lot of Strange New Worlds ships that I hope that Fanhome does in their collection. Actually, the one I'll put out a plug for a one-off ship that I would love to see is that they had a quote Crossfield class appear in the last season opener. It was a fake Star Trek starship that borrowed a lot of the elements from the season 1, season 2 Star Trek Discovery, and that was a fun blend of styles. I would love to see them make that ship, but hopefully the Fanhome models continue long enough that we get to see a lot of ships from Strange New Worlds and all the other shows. So now that we've kind of had a tour of the ship, why don't we see it on the stand and then compare it to some other ships in the line? So again, just sort of the standard base. Unmarked, no sticker, but very much like the Eagle Moss stands. Nice big chunky plastic clear stand. So it looks like it just slots onto the saucer. External to the warp nacelles, which I think is a good choice. It actually kind of clips in there. Oh, I see what's happening. So it clips just to the exterior of the nacelle pylons. Doesn't really lock into anything, so it can kind of rotate a little bit. But so here it is on the stand. The Farragut has a nice upward rake. So that's nice, a nice little action pose. I also particularly like the upward rake because it makes the ship less stable, less likely to fall out and tip forward. It does wobble a little bit, probably just because it's pretty top heavy. I didn't mention, but the top of the saucer is metal. Most of the rest is plastic. So it does, the center of mass is pretty far forward, but feels pretty stable as far as Eagle Moss and Fanhome ships go. So let's compare her to some other ships in the fleet. So, of course, for comparison, I had to pull out the USS Enterprise. This is the XL version of the Enterprise from Star Trek Discovery Season 2. The Eagle Moss actually ended up making 2 of these Enterprises from Disco Season 2, the XL being the larger one. Between the XL and the regular size, they are almost identical. So I didn't bother grabbing my regular size version. The XL is also an interesting point of comparison because if you actually take the Farragut and the XL Enterprise, they have almost the exact same size primary hull. It's not quite identical. The XL is ever so slightly larger in terms of the primary hull. But that is a very interesting comparison. So these will look nice next to each other on a stand. They'll certainly feel like they belong next to each other. There are some interesting differences between these models. The paint is obviously different. The Enterprise is a sort of darker gray with maybe hints of blue in it. The Farragut is a little bit lighter, a little bit more warm tones in the gray. When you get up to the bridge domes, they are notably different. I mean, at first glance, they have the same basic shape, this sort of teardrop shape, but you can immediately see on the XL Enterprise, it has this sort of darker gray region that is presumably the bridge window. It has less molded detail than the Farragut. The Farragut has a lot of grid lines on it that are molded in. The sensor dome on top has a lot of grid lines, and it's in a nice blue. The XL Enterprise is much more subdued, much less detail there. The windows are white. The painted windows, at least, are white. Here you can see, yet again, as per usual, the windows and molded detail are not necessarily perfectly aligned, but 'tis the plight of Fanhome and Eagle Moss. But otherwise, the saucers are pretty similar. Even the little greebly bits on the Farragut are present only on the Farragut, like these little protrusions I mentioned, absent from this version, or at least greatly subdued. There actually are some subtle ones, but it doesn't feel as crisp as the Farragut does. You can see some other similarities and differences. The grid lines are largely the same. On the Farragut, you don't get the sort of dark gray arc on the edge of the saucer. You don't get as many rings of color detail as you do on the Enterprise. But once we move away from the top of the saucer, things get more and more different. Of course, the bottoms of the saucers are notably different because the Farragut has that secondary hull blended into the bottom of the saucer, absent from the XL Enterprise. But by and large, they look very similar. The rim of the saucer, actually this is a good example of what I was talking about earlier. A lot of previous Eagle Moss models lacked a lot of detail on the rim. Here you can see they have molded detail. It's actually, the molded detail looks almost identical to what's on the Farragut, but no painted detail, or very little painted detail other than the windows. So like the Aztecing does not continue onto the rim. Which is a little disappointing because there is detail there on the VFX model. But you do get that here on the Farragut. So the Aztecing continues over the rim. It's just nice detail. Of course, our deflector dish on the Farragut is this ellipsoidal copper structure. It's a little bit more gold on the XL Enterprise, definitely circular. Lots of nice detail. This model, the Discovery Season 2 Enterprise, both the regular and the XL version are very nice. They're currently the only version of this Enterprise that exists, at least in a ready-to-buy format. You can buy models of this ship. I do think it would be nice if Fanhome made the updated version of this ship from Strange New Worlds, because there are some differences. Some of them are major, like the addition of windows along the edge of the rim of the saucer. Some of them are more subtle, like they added a lot of greebly texture to the top of the saucer, particularly near the bridge and on this sort of impulse section. They added a lot of texture into the nacelles, some added lights that could be captured with molded plastic on an updated model. Let's actually compare the nacelles. So you can see on the Farragut, you have the red, largely transparent piece-hard collectors compared to the orange on the Enterprise model. You can see the things I was talking about with regards to the nacelle changing thickness on the Farragut in a way that is different than the Enterprise. While the saucers are almost the same size, the nacelles on the Farragut are definitely shorter than on the XL Enterprise. The scale of the printing and the detail is also just so much finer on the Farragut. Here you can see the aft of the nacelles and that sort of gridding. So here on the original XL Enterprise, they have sort of an inlaid blue transparent plastic with gray printed over it to give the paneling, whereas it's purely a painted detail on the Farragut. It's worth noting that on the XL Enterprise, that blue grid on the nacelles is actually transparent or translucent plastic, so it catches the light a little bit differently compared to the painted version on the Farragut, which has sort of a light blue paint. So putting these ships together, they look pretty nice. It's almost like I recreated a scene out of Wrath of Khan, the Reliant and the Enterprise facing off. I thought I'd bring in one other ship, just to bring in something different that may not be in everyone's collection, that I really appreciate. Is towards the end of its run, Eagle Moss also did the fleet ships from the 2009 Star Trek movie, including this little ship, the USS Mayflower, NCC 1621. So this is only ever in the background of Star Trek 2009, but I grabbed it because of some obvious similarities. It's a saucer with two nacelles connected by pylons, has the same general layout, but from a very different stylistic universe. Nonetheless, there are a lot of similarities. So lots of nice fine grid lines, large registry. This has a nice chrome finish, sort of a chrome metallic silver. Almost no windows on this ship, which naturally I will complain about. Not complain about the Eagle Moss model. The Eagle Moss model is perfectly fine. It's more of a complaint about the original design. And these sort of Kelvin style nacelles. But I just thought this was a nice little comparison of yet another saucer and 2 nacelle ship. This was sort of regular size in the Eagle Moss model compared to the Fanhome model. So the Fanhome model is substantially larger. But I wanted a good excuse to bring out this little ship. I love the little fleet ships from 2009. So now that we've had a close look at the Farragut and compared it to a few other ships of the line, let's actually pull over the magazine and have a look inside. Really like the nice colorful cover art here. It looks very nice. Just notice that these have issue numbers up in the top right. Only took 3 of them for me to notice. Let's open it up. So on the inside cover are some mounting instructions. And then some basic details over here along with a forward plan view. Bellerophon class. I did not actually know that. Bellerophon class, length 316 meters, captained by Garavik. Weaponry, phasers, and photon torpedoes. Impulse and warp engines. So I'm not going to go through every page and read it in detail. We have some lovely views of the ship, some description of how it showed up in Star Trek Strange New Worlds and the in-universe story of the ship, which is nice. Here are some lovely plan views of the ship, orthographic views of the ship, and I'll bring this up every single time. I love these views. I love having these sort of architectural designs of the ship, orthographic views. I just wish that they labeled things. I have such fond memories of looking back at things like the Star Trek Encyclopedia or the Star Trek magazine, and they would have lovely details of the ships that I know the production team have. And even if it's really simple things like warp engine and deflector, I think it's warranted to put here. It's a missed opportunity, at least, especially when the production has thought through these things. Maybe they haven't. Maybe I'm giving them too much credit. I doubt it. But it's just something I would love to see in these magazines. We have a section here about designing the Farragut, clearly mentioned in the original series. Ooh. I always love concept art. I love learning how ships come to be. So clearly they were inspired by the Miranda-class USS Reliant. They're actually referencing some comic books showing sort of Miranda-class ships with original series styling. So that's really interesting. I'm excited to read this and learn more about how they came to be. Some interesting views up here with the shape that we basically have, but with this added curved roll bar that connects to the curvature of those nacelle pylons. So actually maybe I guess that's the origin of that inward curve. It's really interesting. You can see it looks very Reliant like in the side profile in this original concept art. The curved view from the front, very reminiscent of Vulcan ships from Star Trek Enterprise. It's an interesting choice. I wonder why they removed it. I guess it doesn't really do anything. There's no structure on that ring, but I'll have to read and find out. Ooh, more concept art. Yay. So lots of different views. It looks like they pretty quickly latched on to this sort of inward curved design. Some versions over here with structure up on that roll bar. Here there's a couple different pylon connection points. Up here on the top right, you can see things that look a little bit more classic, Reliant-like, less curvature, shorter pylons. Actually, this almost makes me think of the Centaur a little bit. Maybe it's just the proportions of the nacelle to saucer. And then they ultimately ended up with the ship that we have. Ooh, a nice image of the plaque, which I'm sure is chock full of Easter eggs to different production staff. But yeah, this looks good. I'm excited to read it. That's the end of the magazine, nothing else. Now, while that's the end of the magazine, it's actually not the end of what was in the box delivered with the USS Farragut. So this was issue 3, which actually meant we were due for some of the first sort of rewards for subscribing to this collection. So every few issues, there's a bonus thing that's meant to come with your ship to sort of entice you to subscribing. We're actually due for 2 things. One that I did not receive was a metal Raktajino mug, which we received notification from Fanhome would be delayed until a subsequent issue. So a little disappointing that they're falling short on deadlines already. I'm not too heartbroken about not getting the mug on time. Hopefully I do eventually get it. Otherwise I'll be very disappointed. But what I did get was the other bonus item, which is this, which at first took me a minute to figure out what I was looking at. This, I believe, is a binder for the magazines. Unlike Eagle Moss, which sent these largely constructed binders, this came flat packed, wrapped in plastic. So why don't I open her up and have them look and see what she's like. So here it is out of the plastic wrap. I think it has a little instruction. So I was mistaken. This is not a binder. This is a holder. Okay, that is interesting. So I thought it was going to be a binder. Maybe I didn't read the bonus information clearly enough. But this is a nice, pretty thick cardboard with a nice printing of some ships on it. So theoretically, you would take your magazines, be able to store them in here like so. And you know, okay, so I received the binders for the Eagle Moss collection back when I was subscribing to that. And to be honest, I never used them. I just have a place on my bookshelf where I have the Eagle Moss magazines all lined up, roughly by size. And the binders just, I don't know, maybe I was too lazy to use them properly. This is simple, and I'm sure magazines aren't that thick. This will probably hold all the magazines we get, at least in the first 20. This is a pretty simple solution. I thought I would not use this when I got it, but I might actually use this just to help keep these magazines all in one place. So that's a little surprise. And so with that, we have reached the end of this video. I think we've had a good look at the USS Farragut, the Fanhome model from Star Trek Strange New Worlds. All in all, I think it's a great little model. I look forward to thinking about how this model will shape my view of this class as it shows up more and more in Strange New Worlds, even if it's just in the background. I always like having a physical model. It helps make things more tangible. And I often find that just having it, holding it every once in a while, I change my views of these ships over time, and sometimes I grow to appreciate them more. And so that concludes our view of the Fanhome Star Trek Starships Collection, issue number 3, USS Farragut, NCC 1647. All in all, I think this is a nice model. It captures a nice background ship from Strange New Worlds. And even though the ship is, it is a background ship, I don't think it's going to be my favorite ship from Strange New Worlds anytime soon, but I'm excited to have it in my fleet. I tend to find when I have these ships and can look at them over many days, weeks, months, or even years, my view of the ship and the design tend to change. And plus, who knows what the Farragut has in store for us in future seasons of Strange New Worlds. But with that, let's call it for the end of this video. If you like this video, please let me know by leaving a like or a comment down below. This is a big experiment for me, So I really appreciate any constructive feedback you might have. But until next time, live long and prosper.